Alrighty. Welcome everyone again. Thank you so much for being here with us. My name is Tori Ann. I am the communication strategist here at Clymb. We are an emotional wellness platform for youth, and we're hosting this webinar to just spread some information on the neuroscience of mindfulness, some practical tips that we can share to help you in this back to school season, this new school year, to help students regulate their emotions. So we're super excited. We're going to do some brief introductions, and then we're going to have our guest speaker, Natalie Banwarth, share with us some of the research, and then our team member, Kathy, is going to share a bit about Climb, and then we'll open it for a Q&A. And so just as a quick little fun exercise, I wanted to invite us all to just tune into the chat where you're calling in from. It can be from the US, it can be from California, it can be from Baltimore, you can be tuning in from your kitchen, wherever you want to. And when I count down to, I'm going to count down to 3, 2, 1. And when I say 1, we're all going to press enter, and our locations will waterfall in. So I'm just going to give everyone a second to type in where they're tuning in from. And then I'm going to count down 3, 2, 1, and let's see where we all are at. All right, ready? 3, 2, 1. Awesome, awesome. I see some Baltimore. Shout out to the O's. We see some Long Island in here, Charm City, Washington State, Garrett County. Awesome. So it's great to see us. We're in a bunch of different places across the country, really. So that's really exciting. And this is just a small group of people who showed up today. So again, we really appreciate you, and super excited to share this information. Some quick housekeeping. If you can, please keep your audio and video muted until the Q&A. This will help with the recording, just to keep it all centralized. And then if you would like, this is optional. If you right click on someone who does not have their video on, you can press hide non-video participants, and that will just help your view of the event. And so without further ado, I'm going to introduce our guest speaker, Natalie Banwarth. She is a licensed certified social worker in the clinical in the state of Maryland here, with over 10 years of experience in her post-clinical, with over 10 years of postmaster's clinical experience. She serves the mental health needs of children, adolescents, and their families in school, community, and clinic settings. She's on our advisory board, and she is the owner of Heart Space Counseling, her private practice here in Baltimore. And so without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to Natalie to share a bit with us about the neuroscience of mindfulness.
Thank you, Tori, for that introduction. I'm very happy to be here today. Thank you all for tuning in. And we'll go ahead and get started here. Okay. So a little bit more about me and my practice. I kind of naturally fell into this niche in working with my students, my clients, where I've seen more and more neurodivergent students. And part of that, what's been cool about that is that the more I dove into that research around that, the more it kind of reaffirmed how important, how essential mindfulness is. And especially with neurodivergent students, that's an extra challenging part of that experience, is picking up on bodily sensations, being aware of their body and their body in space, their, what about their environment is interacting with them. And so just wanted to voice that in terms of this is not just for certain clients. This has applications across the board with all students, and that just it really reinforced the importance of mindfulness practices for me. Okay, so today what we're going to be talking about, just a brief overview: what is nervous system dysregulation, the impact on child development and learning that happens.
Natalie, I'm just going to stop you for a second because we don't see your slides.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Let me see. Okay.
We got you now.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. So, where does mindfulness come in then? And then we're going to take a little closer look at the research and evidence around that, and then go into identifying dysregulation in our students and our clients, and then some approaches and strategies to leave you guys with, along with some resources. Okay. So, nervous system dysregulation. When we talk about dysregulation, we don't just mean when somebody's agitated or frustrated. Dysregulation means that our state, our physical state, our emotional state does not match the situation. So if we were being chased by a lion and we were not in flight mode, then that would not match the situation. If we were calm, we would not want to be calm in that situation. We would want our body to respond with that flight response and that fear response. And so, yes, dysregulation does not just mean being calm all the time. It means it's an appropriate response to the situation going on. And then our autonomic nervous system is divided into parasympathetic and the sympathetic system, as most of you know. But I just wanted to refresh on how many body processes these really control. So the parasympathetic system, that helps us regulate. That's working, that's engaged when we feel safe. And so that constricts pupils, stimulates saliva flow necessary for digestive processes. It slows down the heart rate. It helps us breathe. It stimulates our stomach, again, the digestive system, bile release so that we can digest that food, and then the bladder contracts the bladder when it's supposed to. On the sympathetic side, that's our alarm system. It senses danger and it responds very physically. It activates the amygdala, our emotion center. It dilates our pupils, so you'll see that like wide eye look. Inhibits saliva flow because we don't need it at that moment. Accelerates heart rate, dilates our lungs, so we have more oxygen flowing, more endurance to run away from that lion. It stimulates the stomach, pancreas, and intestines, but is actually shutting down that digestive system. Adrenaline's pumping, it inhibits bladder contraction. And so, yes, as you can see in that refresher, it really is impacting the whole body, this nervous system, these nervous systems. And so that's really important for our students to kind of know what state they're in. If that's a lot of internal stimuli going on, that's going to be affecting their state and their readiness in the classroom. Okay. So the ventral vagal system, that's the social engagement system. That's the human brain, the most recent, the newest system from that only developed 200 million years ago when we evolved from mammals.
Hey, Natalie, can you try going back and forth to this slide? It looks like it got cropped. If you go back to the next slide.
The next one.
Or, sorry, I don't know. It looked like it got, there it is. It's there now.
Okay. Okay. Well. Okay. Before that, we were reptiles. We started out as reptiles before we evolved to mammals, and then primates. And so we actually do have a reptilian brain. It's the oldest system. It's was 500 million years ago. That's how old it is. And that's our dorsal vagus nerve. That's part of the vagus nerve and the dorsal vagus nerve. And that's the immobilization system. So that's responsible for the fainting, freeze, shutdown, dissociation, surrendering, conserving energy for vital organs. And you think of a reptile's response to a predator, they freeze. And even I think it's in Florida, the reptiles, when it's a certain temperature, they fall out of the trees. That's more of a metabolic response, but it helps me remember what's going on in this complete immobilization response. And so the need there is safety and avoiding harm. When that need is met, we feel peace. When that need is not met, we feel fear. And then we evolved to mammals, crawled on land, and there was a need for a fight-flight response. This was 400 million years ago. And the fight-flight response is a response to danger, but not not really critical, life-threatening, immediate danger. It's kind of the first stop in sensing a threat. And there you'll see fear, terror, panic, restlessness, anxiety, worry. And where we want to live most of the time is in the ventral vagus. That's the social engagement system. So that's feeling social bonding, feelings of connection with others, feeling that the environment is safe. We're able to be joyful. We're able to be open-minded. We're able to be curious to the present moment. So that's the goal there. And that's a basic need. And when we feel that, we feel safety, we feel love, we feel connection. And so here you can kind of think of this as a ladder. This is polyvagal theory. The dorsal vagal pathways at the bottom, the sympathetic in the middle, ventral vagal at the top. Again, the sympathetic, that's the first line of defense. And so from there, we can shift down if our body decides that there's a really dangerous threat. We can drop down to that dorsal vagal pathway, and that's when you'll see that shutdown, that collapse. And our neuroception is what kind of decides that. And so again, it's important to understand the connectedness with others. That social connectedness is a biological imperative for us to move forward with anything, to access our full capabilities, because of the impact that it has on our full system. And it takes in information in three different ways: from inside the body, so internal sensations; outside the body, our environment; and then the communication between the two systems. Most of you know the fight, flight, or freeze. I just want to also add to that, there's really 5 Fs: the fight, flight, freeze, fawn, and some people refer to it as forget it, which is essentially that numbing, that collapse, that dorsal vagus response. Fawning is more like people pleasing. I'm going to say and do whatever I need to do to get rid of this threat, even when it's at the cost of myself. Freeze and flight are both part of that sympathetic response. So they're both an active, physically active response. Even though that freeze is a freeze, it's still the body's pumping. It's sending that signal to freeze, to be inconspicuous, to be still while the predator or threat moves on. And then flight is also, a part of that. Okay, so the impacts. Memory, our ability to intake and retain new information. the chronic stress, interferes with that. We know it shuts off the access to that frontal lobe, that reasoning, that problem solving, that working memory, and therefore learning. It affects learning outcomes. Test anxiety. If we're in that state of threat, we're not going to be able to recall information, even if we have learned it. So you'll hear students say, like, my mind goes blank, I can't remember anything. That's a very real thing. It's that, our brain is shutting off access to that system because there are more important priorities going on as far as it's concerned. It's our body's turning on the amygdala, the alarm system, which is really great at responding to actual threats, but it's a horrible supervisor for managing situations where we need to use that problem solving. Creativity, again, shuts off access to that. That's important for play and for learning. We know that kids learn the most through play. And when we're in a state of threat, everyone is perceived by the body as a threat, even when that person might be talking calmly. It's not going to be received that way until that child, that student, has physically re-regulated, and we've helped them re-regulate. So, impact on the whole well-being. Of course, emotional regulation impacts the student, the client's ability to emotionally regulate themselves. It's blocking oxytocin. And so that's the bonding hormone, the connection hormone, that's absolutely essential in building those social connections with others, which, like we talked about, is a biological imperative to move forward. We need to feel that safety, that connection with others, in order to access all of these executive functioning skills. Physical health outcomes. We know there's worse physical health outcomes for long-term chronic stress. Again, impacts ability to play. If a client is stuck in fight or flight or freeze, they're not going to be able to play. Brain development, we know it impacts, it slows neural connections, and that over time, those neural connections can actually shrink. And the brain rewires itself for a stress pathway to access a stress pathway more easily. So you can think of it kind of as a water choosing the path of least resistance. That's the way it's going to go. So the more we worry, the better we become at worrying. The more that water is going to find that pathway, it's going to be stronger. The good news is that with neuroplasticity, plasticity that can be reversed. And so we can rewire our brains for resilience through long-term mindfulness practices. And we see that in the research we're going to talk about. Okay. So we know that consistent long-term mindfulness and meditation practices, they reduce the size of the amygdala. Again, that's the emotional center of the brain. So it reduces the size of the amygdala and grows gray matter, which is the good stuff. That's that's the stuff we want in the frontal lobe. And so we see that an increase in neural connections in the frontal lobe with long-term mindfulness practices, and that in turn leads to lower cortisol levels and improved physical health outcomes, leads to greater access to empathy and compassion, and for us clinicians, better treatment outcomes. And there's actually research coming out on mindfulness and treating depression and kind of solidifying mindfulness as a treatment option for depression, which we thought but was appropriate or was helpful, beneficial before, but now we're getting closer to having that official evidence. Okay, and the biggest the biggest result in terms of school functioning is greater access to executive functioning. That's what we want for our kids, for our students to succeed, both emotionally and academically in school. When we regulate, when we're able to help them regulate, that access returns, that executive functioning returns. Okay. So taking a closer look at the research, mindfulness practice can serve as an indicator for grades, for grade point average, which is a pretty cool thing. That, you know, if we know that a student or a classroom is practicing long-term mindfulness, we can then, you know, predict better grade outcomes, and maybe that impacts funding. So practical applications there. In a randomized control study of second and third grade children ages 7 to 9, mindful awareness practices were delivered for 30 minutes twice per week for 8 weeks, which is not very much. And children who started out with poor executive functioning and went through this training showed larger gains in behavioral regulation, metacognition, and global executive control than students who had average or high executive functioning. So if you think about, like, what about my neurodivergent clients and students who really struggle with those executive functioning skills and accessing them on demand? Can mindfulness work for them too? The answer is yes, absolutely. In fact, we see stronger benefits for students who struggle more with executive functioning. We see it them making up a wider gap. One thing to note, though, it's important to note that with that study, the mindfulness strategies that they included involved games and play and exercises. And so it does not need to involve stillness or being quiet. In fact, it's going to be more appropriate for those students with more active, speedy brains. You know, the thoughts are flowing quickly. It's going to be more important for those students to meet them where they are in terms of how to engage them. Movement's going to be very helpful. And we don't need to be still. We don't need to have them be quiet in order to reap these benefits and reach a mindful state or even meditative state. And there was a study providing the first evidence that mindfulness training can reduce proactive interference in working memory, which is proactive interference is when old information interrupts the learning of new information. So, for example, a student has learned Spanish and now they're learning French, and they cannot retain that new language because the Spanish is interfering with that. It's interfering with that process to retain that new information. So what the study found was that mindfulness training can reduce that interference and make improvements in working memory and increase the left hippocampal volume, which is particularly the left hippocampal volume plays a key role in long-term working memory, particularly verbal memory. And so think about how much verbal communication is going on with your students and clients. It's a pretty big benefit to take advantage of there. And just including here that we can see these structural changes happening in imaging and MRIs. We can see this gray matter growing, which is really cool. Improvements in mindfulness are associated with increase in empathy, emotional stability, perspective taking, self-confidence in one's competence and conscientiousness. And that this all leads to greater resilience and the ability to bounce back when we're experiencing challenges and high stress or trauma. And something that's really cool that I came across is the Stanford Institute for Empathy and Compassion at UC San Diego is currently studying the neurology of compassion, just like any other neurocircuit. So I'm interested to see down the line how that intersects with mindfulness and these studies that we're seeing and what pathways are activated with mindfulness. And I'm curious to see if that compassion intersects. Okay. So identifying dysregulation in our students and clients. I want you guys to think about some moments where you might have picked up on dysregulation in your students. And think to yourselves, can you identify what polyvagal pathway they were in at the time? And in the chat, just kind of shout out what's the most frequent pathway or response you see in your work in the schools. And so you could just say they're in the dorsal vagal pathway most of the time, or I see more people in the fight or flight, the sympathetic pathway, or you can just use the fight, flight, freeze, collapse states. But just, type in the chat which one you tend to see the most, you think, in your work. See sympathetic, fight or flight. Yeah, I think in the schools, because of the amount of stimuli going on, and depending on the groups, but primarily sympathetic. Yeah, all of the stimuli going on, there's a lot to take in, and so I think most of the time our students are overstimulated and reach that sympathetic level very easily, that fight flight response very easily. Okay, you guys can go ahead and keep answering. I'm going to move on. Okay. So differentiating from freeze and shutdown can be a little bit tricky. So I just want to go over this. It's important because we need to know what state our clients are in and what state our students are in, because that's going to determine what approach is going to be best. So if a client is already hyper aroused, if they're in a state of fight or flight or freeze, then we're not going to use techniques that are going to get them more amped up or more active or more excited. We're going to focus on engaging that breath, doing some of that somatic work to bring them back, that co-regulation. If a client is hypo aroused, they're understimulated, then we might do more to engage the body in order to ground them. We might incorporate more senses in order to kind of bring them back. And I'll share an example in a bit about that. But the difference between freeze and shutdown, freeze is part of that sympathetic response and that activation. This is more like you'll see the clients are tense, they're full of energy that they can't release it, they're kind of stuck, and they might even say that, like, I feel stuck. But it's an active response still. Their heart rate's raised, their breathing's faster, the body is ready to go back to that fight or flight response as soon as the threat passes. That's different from the shutdown and the collapse. That shutdown and collapse is more of that numb response. This is more of that reptilian response. that immediate fear. The muscles are loose. They're limp. The client may not be able to speak. The heart rate drops. Blood pressure drops. They'll usually feel numb, the dissociation, and so much so that it can result in fainting, feeling detached from the body, physical numbness, hard to feel limbs, extremities, and it's a very primal, response, that immobilization. You also see like hopelessness, lethargy, despondency, and then in the freeze response, you'll still see that anxiety, that tension, and that feeling of like chaos and deer in headlights look. So example there of the collapse, the shutdown, and a client, I'll call them Nina, who called me, in an SOS kind of situation, and their mom was with them. Their mom helped call, and they explained that Nina was having trouble feeling her hands, her fingers. She could not feel them whatsoever. She couldn't get them to move. She was trying really hard. And right before that, they had a conflict. Nina and her mom had a conflict, and it was about screen time, which really for Nina was removal of her social connections. She's neurodivergent, and so that was her main method of connecting with others, of feeling that safety, feeling that basic need of connection to others, and that the threat there was that being taken away. And so her body responded as such. That this is a core need that I have. This is being taken away. So even though there wasn't a lion in the room, there might as well have been. And so she went straight to that collapse, that shutdown, that disconnection from the body. And it's automatic. She didn't have control over that. And so she was scared. She was so panicked. She was really freaked out that she couldn't feel her hands. It had never happened to her before. And her mom was pretty worried too. And so with the help of her mom, I talked her through the mammalian dive response, which I'll include the link to this later on, but it's found in this workbook, as well as you might have come across it in your work. But the mammalian dive response is something built in. When we dive underwater, we need to conserve energy, we need to conserve oxygen, and so our body automatically responds. It has this reflex where it slows down all of our processes and sends that a calming signal so that we can survive. We can hold our breath longer underwater. And so we can kind of activate that artificially with an ice pack, cold water, and getting our torso at least parallel to the floor to imitate diving into water. And that water, that ice pack, it needs to be cold in order to activate this reflex. And so I had the client lean forward, instructed them to hold their breath, dive into that ice pack, hold their breath for about 8 seconds, come back up, pause for a moment, and do it again, and keep doing that until they start to feel a shift in their body with their mom's help because they couldn't move their hands yet. The first time they did it and came back up, they started to get sensation back in their fingers, started to tingle. The second time they came back up, they were able to start to move their fingers a bit. By the third time, they had full motor control and they were calm. They were starting to breathe slower. The panic was going away. They were able to talk. And so that's a more severe kind of example there of what that shutdown can really look like. Okay. The shark fin is a cool thing for younger kids. I'm gonna just include this here and let Tori send this out to you rather than go through it with you guys. But it's a really cute way to get younger students especially ready for mindfulness. Glitter jars, this is a popular one. But for those of you who aren't familiar with it, you can make these and talk about big emotions and how they can swirl around when we're mad and angry and confused. And you shake the jar up, and of course, like all the glitters swirling around, and you can't see through it at that point. So you instruct them to breathe with whatever feeling, with whatever emotion is going on in that moment, and just watch and be still, be the observer of those feelings. They're not trying to change those feelings. And they're just watching and waiting until the glitter dissipates, settles to the bottom, just like those emotions take time to settle. And all we can do is breathe through them and know that they're going to. And so you have them watch until they can see through the jar again. And the lesson there is we don't want our feelings to disappear. They're important. We need them. But we also don't want them to block our view of seeing clearly what's really going on. The mirror game, I'm also gonna, just for the sake of time, skip over this and include some more information for Tori to send out in the email. Walking meditations. There's a bunch that you can do with this. So walking, again, the students that are more active and are, have a harder time sitting still. Walking with coins on top of their shoes so that they don't fall off. So getting them to think about how they're stepping and gently step and think more about where their limbs are in space, and walking with different emotions. So like kind of personifying an emotion and have them think about how anger would walk or how sadness would walk. Getting them playing, connecting with that playfulness to help regulate them, bring them out of that threat state. So having them come up with silly walks, and the game there is the Ministry of Silly Walks, and see how silly you can be with that. Walking with all of our senses, can they incorporate all their senses into the walk? Walking to notice the beautiful, and that being the goal of the walk, noticing what's around them, seeing how quiet they can walk. And then animal walks, imitating different animals of different sizes, and how they might walk, again, getting them to focus on their body and awareness and connection to their body. So some useful tools, Clymb, of course, and we'll talk a little bit more about Clymb in a bit. Mindful games, some activity cards, and then these are some books that I have personally used with clients in the past and have found them helpful. Breathe Like a Bear, Master Mindfulness, and Sitting Still Like a Frog are more for younger grades. And then the Neurodivergent Friendly Workbook of DBT Skills has so much mindfulness crossover. So that's like a big part of DBT. And that one can be used more for older kids, but also for younger as well. And so creating a school culture of mindfulness, that really starts with our own practice. That's the foundation. We can't get the kids on board unless we're on board. They're going to see us modeling or not modeling it. And so it's important for us to have that going for ourselves and be genuine with it. And then create that mindfulness in the adults in the schools, make it part of staff meetings, make it part of your day. And that's going to trickle down to the students and be contagious. And then we can start teaching the mindfulness to students as you're doing that, integrating it into those the school setting across the board, and eventually reaching that goal of living mindfulness, where it's not so much a conscious thought process anymore. It's just what you do. It's just a part of your life. And so in order to support that, we need to think about advocacy and bringing in stakeholders to make sure that we have the resources to be able to make this sustainable. And so I'll end on that. And thank you all for your time. Thank you for having me. And I'll pass it over to Kathy just to talk a little bit about the Clymb petition, in terms of advocacy and how you can get involved there.
Thank you, Natalie. I am going to screen share myself for a moment here. And as Natalie was saying, we do have a petition here that the founder and CEO of Clymb started with change.org, and it's to prioritize mental health and wellness funding at all levels of government. So I'm going to have Tori put the link to that change.org petition in the chat. And also she's going to share that with you when she emails you. I just want to tell you a little bit about our platform, because it does help to support emotional wellness. And from what a lot of what Natalie said, we need to make sure that we, know who's in our classroom, know who's in our school, and what they're going through and what kind of feelings and emotions they're having. And that's what Clymb does. So just really briefly, Clymb is an emotional wellness platform for school-age children. When the kids log in, they answer a few questions about how they're feeling and where their focus level is. We even have a dashboard that's more compact for our youngest climbers. Clymb then pushes out 3 activities to them, 3 different resources that meet them where they are, and the students get to choose which resource they're going to use that day. All of the resources are aligned with the CASEL competencies within our resource library. So students or teachers can look up resources based on content or competency. The really cool part about Clymb, and having been a classroom teacher myself for 16 years, is that your adult stakeholders get their own dashboard. So this is a great way for your school counselors, your homeroom teachers, your admin to check in on your students. You can look at one student in a very granular way and see how they're doing and see how they're moving through those SEL competencies. And you can even look at students as a whole group. We have a wall of wonder where students can post. We have badges and streaks that keep the kids wanting to come back. And we all know where this is making an impact in schools with climate and culture, all of the things that can be helped and mitigated when we have a good SEL program in our school and our school feels emotionally well. It's going to have an impact on that climate and culture of the whole school. So I just want to take a few minutes to tell you about Clymb. We appreciate Natalie giving us her expertise this afternoon, evening. All of the information is here for Tori and myself and for Natalie. And again, Tori will share all of this with you when she sends you the follow-up email. So I'm going to pass it back to you, Tori. I said I'd be quick, and I was quick.
Yes, you were. Thank you so much, Kathy. And thank you so much, Natalie. I feel like each time that we did the rehearsal, but I feel like each time I still learned something new. So thank you for sharing your expertise. And I wanted to just open it up to the audience for any questions. This is a chance to, if you're in the classrooms, if you want to just share any of your experience or anything that, stuck out to you, this is a chance to just open it up for conversation.
And we have educators that have been in school all day, and I feel you. So if anybody wants to put anything in the chat, that's fine. And there will be a follow-up email with all of the resources as well.
Absolutely. And so, yeah, we're here to support you. We appreciate your time again. And if there's no questions, we can honor our word and end a little early, give you your time back. And again, just sending gratitude for the work that you do and for showing up to learn more about how mindfulness impacts our youth and the neuroscience behind it, because it is powerful work, as you can see. All righty. Well, again, thank you for coming. I hope that you have a beautiful rest of your day. And if you're just keep an eye on your inbox, we're going to send some information your way, some more helpful activities from Natalie, and some information about Climb. So if you're interested in meeting with us, there will be a calendar link. Feel free to drop a meeting whenever makes sense for you. But we just appreciate, again, everything you do for our youth. So this is for you, and thanks for showing up. Hope you have a great one.
Good night, everybody. Thanks.
Good night. Thank you, everyone.